Thank you, Chris. And Caroline coming to the podium next. Thank you.
Hello, thank you so much for attending today. I have to say, Annabelle, I feel like the sort of graduate of the University of East Bumcrack, because we have all of these political correspondents up here and then we have me. As some of you will know, I came to Twitter not via politics at all, but via the Victorian bushfires, the same as Mark Scott said this morning. In fact, I was getting on a plane heading to Kinglake when the editor of the online section called and said, "We're going to try something new here. We'd like to see if you can Twitter it." And I didn't know what Twitter was. And he said to me, "It's okay, I'll set you up with an account, and all you have to do is you send your little things to this phone number and they'll appear." It occurs to me now that he has my password. I know that not everybody appreciated what I did at the bushfires. Jonathan Green, my old editor, still one of my favourites in the audience there, thought it was all a bit trite. But a friend of mine said, no, think of it like this way. It's an expressionist painting. Thousands of tiny little brushstrokes making up the larger picture. It was obviously a very good friend who told me that, may even have been my mother. I didn't go back to Twitter for a while after the bushfires, and then I did go back, and now, of course, like the rest of us, I'm something of an addict. In fact, my favourite tweet was the one that came that said, "Oh, it's 10 to 3, just time for a cup of tea and Twitter." And of course, before you know it, it's 6 o'clock. It does surprise me that I'm here on the panel of political reporting. I do write some politics, but my column in The Australian today was about Bob Dylan. So I thought to myself, well, why have they invited me here? And now it's going to get a bit interactive. Just pick up your program, have a look at the front page, and then have a look at the second page. Run through the names. I'm the only person here from News Limited. The only person speaking over the 2 days from News Limited. Now, apparently, we own 70% of the print media in this country, and I'm the only one talking. I said to my husband this morning when I noticed this, what if I walk out there and they hiss at me? And he said, well, don't they do that anyway? Sometimes they indeed do. So I thought to myself, OK, well, what can I add to the discussion as a representative of the News Corporation? And I know, I'm going to take on Mark Scott. I heard Mark Scott this morning, and I heard him speak, and he's a terrific guy, and he's running a great organisation here. And he was talking in a really wonderful way, an excited way, an ambitious way, about the future of the ABC in the digital age, in the online age, and in the Twitter age. He was talking about widgets and how he's going to give them to everybody for free, and you can have them on your websites, and you can have them on your blogs. And he was all over Twitter, and he was all over social media, and they're going to own that too. And I was just a tiny bit frightened by that. I thought to myself, news organisations like mine, commercial news organisations, can't do what the ABC can do. We have to find a way to make this pay. And I know that there are a lot of people in this room who say we won't pay. We won't pay for online. And I think maybe you will. I think that we at News Corporation have some good ideas. We haven't unveiled them yet, we will. I think there are really attractive products out there, and I think you'll be surprised by what we're going to come up with. We're really proud of it. There's a lot of smart thinking going on, and I think it's going to be something that you might find you're willing to pay for. The other thing is we have to make it pay. And of course, I'm a bit Mandy Rice-Davies here because you would be thinking, well, she has to say that, she's a Murdoch girl. But in fact, the News Corporation is not the company most at risk if we don't make this pay. If we don't make online and social and Twitter and all of the news that you are seeing online pay, it's not us that's at risk. Take Sydney as an example. You have 4 daily newspapers. One of those is mine, The Australian. It's a newspaper run by a benevolent proprietor. It isn't dependent on the rivers of gold. Then you have The Telegraph. It has a very chunky, robust circulation, not dependent on the rivers of gold. The 2 men standing, Sydney Morning Herald and the Australian Financial Review. You might be able to put up an argument that the Australian Financial Review has a niche product and that people are going to be prepared to pay for that online. But the fact is, the news organisation most at risk from the free online environment that we're now in is the Sydney Morning Herald. And if the Herald fails, if Fairfax fails, if robust commercial journalism fails because of this online environment that we're in, I think that political reporting in this country will come down to one source, just one source. It will come from the ABC. Now, the ABC in this country is a very robust organisation. It's an independent organisation. It's got a terrific board. It prides itself on not having bias, and we've had so many inquiries into it to tell us that it isn't biased. And I believe all of that to be true. But I don't think that it's a good environment for us to work and live in to have all of our news coming from one source. There are countries like that, and I'm almost certain that they're not as much fun as this one. And a lot of the talk that we've had today has been about how political reporting has been changed by the online environment. And it's true, it's going to be more fun, and it's going to be more interactive, and we're all having a great time. But the change will be much more fundamental when the main news organisations start to fail and we don't come up with any alternatives. Thank you.
Thanks, Caroline. Thank you. And I should just say, in defence of the convener, I did try at length for several people, including... No, of course not. But we actually did approach Rupert at one point, and several of his underlings, none of whom replied. That's right. Okay, John, sorry, thank you.
Caroline was a little worried that people might hiss at her because she was from News Limited. Channel 9 killed Jeff Goldblum. Don't... Please.
And how did it go at Brittany last night?
Yes, don't hold that against me. I didn't kill Jeff Goldblum. Please allow me just a brief moment to explain why I'm here. Partly I'm not completely sure, but I have done a little bit of work as a political reporter in Canberra. My main role, of course, was with Nine in Sydney as their courts reporter, but was the backup reporter for Nine in Canberra, and have been down there for about the last 2 months, and during that time was wrapping up my masters and met Julie on Twitter, and we had a great conversation, and she said, come on board. So thank you for that. It's good to be here. When I first headed down to Canberra, I knew next to no one down there. Latika Burke, who's in the audience, is an old mate of mine from the Central West, Radio 2UE, and she said, if you come down, make sure you sign up for Twitter first. It's great, it's networking, story sources, etc. Well, I already had a Twitter account, but I'm sure, like many of you, I had returned to the warm embrace of Facebook after I put out one of those tentative, hello, is there anyone out there tweets about 12 months ago. Now that I'm in Canberra, or have been in Canberra, and I've really seen an amazing, dynamic, interesting, active conversation that happens in that social media environment, and it surprised me. What will happen in Canberra is a story will break, and of course we then see coverage on television and on the radio and in the newspapers. But what's happening underneath that is this amazing dynamic conversation. And I think, without hopefully putting anyone to sleep, I'll keep it short, there's real room for some research on narrative theory. Because what I think happens is we have mainstream media with the way it understands and treats a story. You then have a multiplicity of views about that story or about what we would call news. And what happens is people will take elements from the news story, they'll take angles, they'll add research, they'll make comments about particular reporters and their take on it. And what you end up having on that second level, that undercurrent, if you like, is almost a created reality, a shared reality, or even in some cases for people who have taken a particular slant with a story and are communicating that amongst their community, their own version of the story. So it's not necessarily an us versus them. There's one way of looking at it. It can be us and them at the same time. Now, look, I feel a little bit like an outsider as far as political reporting because with Nine, I think in total it was 4 or 5 months that I was able to spend in Canberra and enjoyed every moment of that. But I want to just refer to one tweet from the Prime Minister. I had a weekend shift and it was deadly quiet. There was so little happening. And a little bit like in the horror movies where an email pops up out of nowhere, this tweet popped up from Kevin Rudd, and it read, "Thinking of going to the movies with T," which of course is short for Therese, "to see Julie and Julia with Meryl Streep. Any thoughts out there? K. Rudd." Well, look, I'll leave you with three thoughts and leave them as nothing more than food for thought. The first thing that crossed my mind was I was kind of moved that I knew my Prime Minister was going to take his wife to the movies. The second thought that crossed my mind was, and maybe this is a little bit cynical, was this strategic? Is there a Julia and Julie demographic out there, someone said the Prime Minister should be targeting? I'm sure that's not the case. But sitting in a lonely office in the Parliament House Press Gallery, these strange things cross your mind. And the last thought I had was a selfish one. Come back to work, Kevin Rudd. I need some lines for a story and you're going to be at the movies. I've enjoyed my time in Canberra. I'm honoured to be on this panel with this group of journalists and look forward to your questions. Thank you.
Thanks. Thanks very much for witty, engaging and challenging presentations. I think it was great sitting here listening. We're going to take questions now from the audience in the theatre here and also the people formerly known as the audience online. And so I'll get you to put your hands up and have a mic delivered to you. Same protocol as before. Try and keep the questions succinct. 140 characters would be good. And we'll try and whiz through here. Have we got a question there? Blinded by the light. Yes, okay, sorry. Thank you.
Angus Kingston from Radio National. Chris, I was just wondering if you were more engaged with Twitter, with your story, maybe you might have had some sources to confirm what you were looking for.
Yeah, I doubt it somehow.
What makes you doubt it, Chris?
Well, because the other thing too is if I got a source that came back to me on Twitter, how would I know if it was the real Joe Hockey or the fake Joe Hockey?
Direct message them, ring them up, ask to speak to them?
Yeah, but I kind of... Look, I don't know. Maybe that is the case and maybe that's something that I need to explore, but the thing that I have always found useful, and that's just like, you talk about political reporting, so you're talking about an environment in which all these people are captive in this week. They were all there, and I wanted to talk to them face to face. So that's the way I went about doing it, because of the nature of the story. I wanted to see the people, speak to them face to face if I could, and during the course of that day I managed to do that. And for me, that process of verification is absolutely crucial. It's the foundation stone. So I don't know. And look, maybe I'll get more engaged with Twitter and maybe that will happen, and I look forward to it. As I say, I think it's a very useful platform. I'm not criticising it in any way. What I'm saying is if you're talking about political reporting, there are some basics that need to be done.
It's interesting, Chris talks about face-to-face, because it's the one thing that for years, long before Twitter and before the internet, due to downsizing and so on, journalists were finding it increasingly difficult, certainly broadcast journalists, radio journalists, to get away from the desk and to go and actually see people face-to-face. And we've come back to that conversation. Have we got another question? Hi.
Yes, hi, I'm Lucy Carter from Triple J. You've talked about, a question particularly for Annabelle. You've talked about some politicians having sort of stilted responses on Twitter, or, not twittering at all, being, I think you said, debarked. Do you anticipate that the next generation of politicians will perhaps be more open, be more personal on whatever the next platform of social media is? Are we going to be able to get to know our politicians a bit better in the future?
Yeah, look, I think it'll change. I mean, this is a generation of politicians. The ones that are serving now and have been serving for a few years are the ones that are used to the old ways of communicating with people. I mean, politicians as a group tend to look at these new platforms as opportunities for them. How can I use this to get my message from me to as many people as possible? And that's a central mistake that politicians make, I think, about a lot of these social media things. I mean, people aren't signing up for the press releases. People aren't, asking for more crap in their letterbox, Social media is about something very different. It's about more of an interaction. And I think the politicians who romp on there thinking they can just sort of post their dreary press releases have misunderstood the whole thing. Do you remember in the 2007 election campaign when Howard put his first YouTube message up? It was hysterical, he's behind the desk and I think the message, they viewed this as a good way of getting a message out early in the morning that, morning radio could use. It was like a video press release. And the first one, God, it was sweet. It was this sort of behind the desk and good morning. And, it's just the most signal mistake you can make because, of course, who's guaranteeing that everybody is only watching this in the morning? You know, the point about YouTube is there whenever you want to watch it. I mean, and he was widely pilloried for that, bless him, and then, you know, the next sign-on was a bit more. You know, I think he loosened the tie a little and, you know, said, "G'day," or something instead. You know, it's much cooler. But, you know, these things change. You give these people a break. And I think that the younger politicians, like the newer ones, are just sort of, they'll pick it up because they're not used to the sort of older ways of communicating. I just think that if you can either ignore these platforms or make a success of them. And if you make a success of them, it involves, you know, bending a little bit to the demands of the new medium.
Okay, we've got a question from Twitter, which is directed to Caroline Overington from Shoes Off. All of our news is coming from one source. What about pro-ams, freelancers and self-publishing? Shoes Off, asks Caroline Overington.
Again, I didn't really understand the question.
Okay, well, the question, you were making the point that if News Limited folds or if the Sydney Morning Herald was to fold, then there would be this limitation around the variety of professional media voices. So I guess the Shoes Off questioner is asking, have you discounted bloggers and other online communities as people who offer different voices?
It seems to me at the moment that news is broken by traditional media organisations. In Australia particularly, it is largely broken by the ABC, by News Limited, by Fairfax, and a tiny handful of others. And I thought one of the best questions this morning to Mark Scott was from a freelancer who was in the audience. And I know that Mark was saying that he'll be taking content from all around the world, citizens of Australia, and putting it all on these ABC websites and sending it out to everyone. And a freelancer put up a hand and said, you know, what about us? Who's going to pay us? I mean, at the moment we can sell to Marie Claire, or we can sell to the Sunday Mags, or we can sell to Good Weekend. Who's going to pay us if you're running a site that's free and everything you put on it is free? I mean, what about the freelancers there? I think that's a much more important issue, that real media outlets for real working people are disappearing.
Can I make a point there as well?
Sure.
I think it is, you know, this is very much a story about a proliferation of media sources, but like the hard truth about news generation is that it's expensive. Like, it's really expensive. You know, that guy from Wired magazine that's just written that book about information wanting to be free. Yeah, that's true. I also want really nice cheese to be free, and a whole range of other cool things. But, you know, it's expensive, and it's expensive for a reason, and that signal reason is finding out things that people don't want you to know is expensive. It's expensive for the times you don't get a story, as well as expensive for the times you do. Every time, you know, one of these organisations sends somebody overseas with the Prime Minister to, you know, to be there if something happens costs, you know, $15,000. You know, it's really expensive, and they are opportunity costs that, you know, you incur whether or not you get a story. And if you're a lone operator, you can't underwrite that sort of expense. You've got to have funding for the times that you spend 20 days working on something that falls over, you know. And that's the problem with all of this, I think. I mean, information would like to be free, but often the information that is free, really free, is free because it's crap information.
Although the Trafigura case demonstrated something different. Yes, Chris.
The thing is, we're at a transitional period and something that better may well emerge, but it disturbs me that we're at this stage where the mastheads are falling over, and they really are. They're cracking. Just to give you an example, when we travel overseas with the Prime Minister, we have to pool. We have to pool vision with Channel 9, Channel 7, Channel 10, SBS. We have to have one camera that's on the Prime Minister the whole time. We have to have other cameras that are there to get cuts of him, otherwise you can't edit to it. It's a really expensive process. Now, there have been already a number of trips where we can't send cameras to cover what the Prime Minister's doing. What will happen, I imagine, at some stage, the Prime Minister will have one of his staff carrying a camera, and they will feed that vision back to Australia. You'll never again see the footage of Kevin Rudd saluting across the room to George Bush, and the only reason you saw that was because there was an Australian cameraman at that event with all those world leaders who had his camera trained on Kevin Rudd the entire time.
But you will get 1 million mobile phones with similar images, potentially.
There was no one on the floor of that meeting that would have had a mobile phone to record people. That was among a leaders' meeting.
And the other thing I would say too is that we have terrific media in this country. We really get some fantastic stories broken all the time. And the reason we do is because it's competitive. There's competition between News Limited and Fairfax and the ABC, and now there's increasing competition online. That competition breeds... I mean, journalists, you know, they're out there trying to get great stories, in part because they're in competition with other media organisations. Now, if the Sydney Morning Herald falls, and to be honest, it could well be a when. It could well be a
I'm
when.
considering asking you for a cheque, Caroline. I'm erecting a paywall right here.
I mean, let's not kid ourselves about how dire the situation is for Fairfax Media. They are in a shocking state. Believe it, they are in a shocking state. And a media landscape without an organisation like the Sydney Morning Herald and The Age is not something that I'm looking forward to, and I'm surprised that there are people out there who think, well, you know, if these organisations fall over, it'll be fine because we'll have blogs. It really isn't going to be the same.
At least we're profitable still, Caroline. I mean, we're not in as much trouble as you are once your great leader drops off the twig. How old's he now?
I see a twit spat coming on.
Well, we're not trained to say that.
No, it's marvellous that your survival strategy relies on the robust genes of a 74-year-old. But, you know.
With a very young wife. John.
There are other questions that probably haven't been tackled in depth here about why there is a perception that people won't pay online for news. Because I think if you build something that has value, for example... I was on Flickr for a while and realised there was an advanced Flickr account. That was for, you know, $25 a year or something. You could do more with your photos. Really easy with the credit card, so be it. I found Last FM, I think it is, online too, where for $3 a month, you know, you can use your laptop as a radio. You know, then the Aussie bum success story of people buying all their underwear online. I'm just not quite sure why there is this perception that people won't pay for news online, and maybe it will...
I'm not paying for my underwear.
There must
it's very
be a
good underwear,
survival
Caroline, I
strategy
assure you.
that's something to do with news, pictures and underwear. Oh, I know.
Maybe we could...
He was from Channel 9.
But I guess that's the point, is that maybe that the old guard has to collapse before people realise the value of what they've lost.
And that's the tension that we've got now. It's the transitionary phase. I just need to point out, because... Daily Twitter or Media 140 managers have advised that there's a bit of a backstorm happening. People are unhappy that we're only talking about Twitter. Clearly, a lot of the issues in journalism that are current and a lot of the news themes are around Twitter. But we're obviously discussing here not just Twitter, but other social media platforms like Facebook and YouTube and so on. In fact, Annabelle's lovely anecdote of John Howard making his YouTube debut, I dread to think what Twitter would have been like. Can we please take a question from the floor? Yep. There's whoever's got the microphone and is ready to speak, yes.
I suppose I'd step back, Simon Thompson, freelance journalist. I'd step back to what newspapers were when they began, and that was an advertising leaflet. And somewhere along the way it became a fine and noble art, and we're all fine and noble practitioners. But to me, the economic model that's still there is that the medium is delivering a bunch of an audience to advertisers. And I'm in all of this debate about how we're going to pay for it, what's going to happen, and I do think there are problems with paying for good, expensive journalism. Surely the model, whatever the medium is still going to be the same. The publisher is delivering an audience to a bunch of advertisers, and the advertising will pay for the journalism as it always has.
Well, you know, is it advertisers, panel? I mean, we've gotten right into the discussion around paywalls here rather than social media, and perhaps we could try and draw the two themes together in your responses. But we aren't just talking about advertisers, are we? We're looking at all sorts of alternative models here. We have public broadcasting. We're in the halls of a public broadcaster, and also there are models around philanthropy in the States, for example. Anyone want to pick up on that question?
Well, it's just different models of how you pay, really, isn't it? I mean, you know, you pay for newspapers as a combination of the cover price and the fact that when you've completed reading it, you feel oddly like buying a piece of George Jensen jewellery or something. I mean, you know, it's kind of, just because you don't feel it happening doesn't mean it isn't happening, if you know what I mean. I mean, newspapers' difficulty is, I suppose, that advertisers are getting more demanding. They want something more targeted. They want to make sure that their expensive ad gets to a narrower range of people rather than just sort of wasting money, as they see it, scattergunning this sort of message around the place. And, I think that social media has all sorts of possibilities there in the sense that people select themselves into a group, a community of interest. And that's what all is about, isn't it? It's about creating a community of interest. And, obviously there are opportunities for advertisers and that's fine, but I think that on the whole that's an optimistic development. I love anything that kind of helps build communities of people that have things to talk about with each other. I mean, in a society where we're less and less likely to know the names of the people we live next door to, I think it's at least encouraging that there are new and different ways to get in touch with people that you want to talk to in one way or another. Sorry, I've moved off the point, I know, of how to make a quid. I'm moving off that point for a reason.
Exactly. I think we're going to have to separate you two further if we keep going down that path, potentially.
The traditional publishing model, it really does rely heavily on the mass audience. And when there's so much more competition, I mean, Caroline just talked about the sort of diminution of competition, but in political reporting, but the flip side of that is that there's far more competition for media, and traditional media is up against not merely other forms of new media. There's gaming, there's any number of other calls on people's time. So the fragmentation is well underway. The mass aspect is now the problem, and I'm not sure that assembling the community of interest, which gives you something attractive to advertisers like a demographic. That they're particularly keen on, is actually going to make up for the loss of that mass component that is really what was funding the quality journalism.
And there's a question from Thoughts Factory up on the Twitter wall behind me, which goes to some of this stuff around, what is the term he uses, more of a friends approach. And he talks about the fact that The Guardian is an interesting example, which has an established newspaper, very established newspaper with an international reputation, which has embraced social media and apparently is surviving financially. Somebody might have the stats on that, I don't. But any responses around that, about how overcoming the paywall has to do with building friends, whether that comes from back to subscription, I don't know. Complete blank faces, no joke.
Well, I mean, I don't know what that would look like. Is it a news service that looks like and works like Facebook?
Maybe it's national public radio with a bunch of subscribers who interact. Who knows?
Exactly, and somehow within that you're paying to be part of that community because you know that there are elements in it providing verified, checked, credible news, and you share it amongst friends. I mean, I presume that is the kind of model organisations would be looking at.
Right.
The reason we look with blank faces is because there are people right now sitting around the world at tables trying to work out exactly how they deal with this, and no one's really come up with a great idea for it. And my fear in the transition period is that we will lose people who are inquiring into the way that our society works. And we quite often talk about all the things that are wrong with the way that the traditional model of the media worked. But think about so much of the stuff that you see online, it leverages off all of that. It's information that are gathered by working journalists that you see are referenced on all of these blogs. They've got the information. We know about extraordinary rendition because the United States is one of the most open countries in the world, and has a very vigorous, or had a very vigorous media. They were good at keeping their government to account.
Although we've had other
I
industries.
would say on that topic is that when people say, oh, well, nobody's going to pay for something that they can get for free, then one of the things I would say is think back to yourself, when was the last time you bought something off iTunes, and the reason you bought something off iTunes. I can't give away too much because we're in that development stage. We are going to unveil some products that we hope you're going to be really excited about. But let's imagine, for example, one of the reasons that people migrated to iTunes and started buying songs online when they could get them for free was because of the cool new toy that you got, the iPhone and the iPod. And that's kind of what we're thinking.
So iRupert.
You all got your own personal reasons.
Do we have time for one more question, or you want to wind up now? Okay, that's it, unfortunately. Well, somebody's desperate to ask. I'm sorry, I will take Stilgherrian's question because I ignored him on the Twitter wall and he will not forgive me if I don't. So.
No, I won't. Stilgherrian, freelance writer and occasional seagull. I'm intrigued in this discussion. There still seems to be, and I'm going to talk about this a little later today, a confusion between the practice of journalism and the platform on which you're doing it or gathering your information. And Chris Ullman, I'm going to verbal you now, because what you essentially said before was there's lots of information on the internet and you don't know whether it's true or not, and journalism, it's important to do your fact-checking and get it right. Now, I see them as two completely unrelated statements. There's a lot of information on paper which is wrong and you need to check it. A lot of information you receive over the telephone which is wrong and you have to check it, and as Mr Gretsch showed us, email's not trustworthy either. But I was really interested in hearing how these new tools are changing the practice of political journalism, and I'm afraid I've just heard a lot of fear about the media factories are dying, which is true, but where are we going in the future rather than just the doom and gloom?
Right. I can see we have the Q&A audience in. That I think that the same holds true of everything. Just because I mentioned the internet as an example, yeah, there's lots of bad information. You have to sift your way through it. And what I was trying to say was, how's it changed the way that I do political reporting at the moment? Not enormously. It's another platform. It's another way of delivering things. As I said, let 1,000 platforms bloom. The point I was trying to make was that at base, there are some things where you just need to sharpen your pencil and talk to people. That was the point. I hope I was making it clear.
All right, we are going to have to wind it up there with the observation that, and a couple of people commented, we have a panel that's diverse and we have a panel that is a mix of the famous and the not-so-famous in political journalism, and that's one of the things that is changing, the interactions between political reporters online, on Twitter. You're getting lots of new voices coming through who don't necessarily have prominence. So thank you very much for what I thought was, yes, apparently a presentation that would attract criticism, but yet one that was really fundamentally meaningful. Thank you very much.